Postmodernism is a reaction to the Enlightenment. It's responding to the inadequacies of the Enlightenment. And as much as a lot of postmodern thought is opposed to the concept of truth, of God, of authority, there's also within the critique of the Enlightenment this opening of the door to rediscover God, to rediscover eternal truths that were they're kind of covered over by modern Enlightenment thought.
Welcome back to the Spe Salvi Institute Podcast. I'm Andrew Petiprin with Bobby Mixa. Bobby, where have you been and where are you now?
Yeah, well, it's been a while. I've been up in the northeast corner of Poland, so in Podlasha. So I've been going back and forth to this city called Białystok a number of times, which is a pretty cool city. Most people don't know about it, but it's like, it's where Esperanto comes from, and all these cultures. You have like the Jewish culture, which was, it's no longer there, but you have a lot of Orthodox and a lot of Catholics. So it's it's a really interesting place of encounter. And it's got the Polish Versailles. So I encourage anybody who comes to Poland, not just to go to Gdańsk, Warsaw, or Krakow, but venture off to the east side by Białystok.
Well, you're finding all the interesting spots for our listeners to hit. I'm envious. I enjoy seeing via Instagram where you are at any given moment.
You were in New York, so I was a little envious of that.
I was just in New York, and our guest today is, I believe, in New York, even as we speak. And our guest is Stephen Adubato. We're really excited to have this conversation with him. Bobby, you and I have both come upon Stephen's work, and we're going to talk about some of that today. Stephen runs a magazine and a website called Cracks in Postmodernity. He's written for Compact and for lots of other publications. So we're just really delighted to have the chance to talk to him today. Stephen, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, as I said, so have we. And maybe we'll just start with, maybe you could just tell us what Cracks in Postmodernity is. It's before we started recording, we sort of all agreed that it's kind of the kind of thing that people get it. When they get it, they love it, and then some people are just kind of like, I don't know if I get it. But tell us about it.
Yeah, I mean it's this kind of esoteric niche kind of thing that, I usually just end up quoting Jesus and saying, "Come and see." You have to come and see in order to understand that. It's hard to describe, but the best way I can explain it is kind of looking at the history of what inspired it. Because when I was in undergrad, I studied religious studies, went on to get a master's in theology. And it's also when I was in undergrad, I ended up coming to faith. But I started to see that, the school I was at covered a lot of postmodern theory, a lot of post-structuralist philosophy, which a lot of people kind of depict to be against tradition, against the teachings of the Catholic Church. But the more I kind of dug into, the origin and ultimate implications of these ideas, I started to see that, okay, I mean, there are really interesting questions being asked within postmodern thought, but also within postmodern culture and art, film, music, popular culture, all that kind of stuff. And I think it's in part because postmodernism is a reaction to the Enlightenment. It's responding to the inadequacies of the Enlightenment. And as much as a lot of postmodern thought is opposed to the concept of truth, of God, of authority, there's also within the critique of the Enlightenment this opening of the door to rediscover God, to rediscover eternal truths that were they're kind of covered over by modern Enlightenment thought. So that's kind of what I'm aiming to do. I'm coming into, looking at all these issues from a traditional Catholic perspective, from an Orthodox Catholic perspective, you can say, but with a real ecumenical spirit, a real curiosity to see where is truth, where is Christ showing up in the culture around us, even if it's in very small ways. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what our agenda is.
Yeah, no, can you explain too, like just the title itself, the cracks part in postmodernity?
Yeah, so as I was saying, like I continuously see these doors opening up within postmodern thought and culture. these doors to, again, rediscovering certain eternal truths. And so that's why I call it cracks. Like there's always something cracking through, even in the errors, the falsehoods that postmodern culture propagates. Like the truth always finds a way of cracking through again, and that's what I want to do. I want to pay attention to those cracks and really, I want to bring other people's attention to it so that we can appreciate. Okay, there are interesting possibilities within the culture, within intellectual life today. So.
Yeah. I like it. Just a little comment here. I mean, reading through your various articles, there's sometimes a way in which people try to find those doors to kind of point to something else, to the transcendent, maybe ultimately as part of kind of an evangelization tactic almost. But your approach doesn't seem to be anything like a tactic. There's something like incredibly genuine and honest about it, which I have to say resonated with me. And I think for like young, I hate saying young folk, but there's that kind of like, you know, genuineness that is, I think sometimes there's a little bit of a suspicion of other, when people start talking about tactics in
Mhm.
new evangelization or engaging the culture that you just don't find in your piece. So, I mean, sorry, that's just kind of a comment, but I really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
No, I mean, but in response to that, I would say, like, first of all, I'm too lazy to devise a set of like effective, practical tactics. Like, that's just not my thing. I'm lazy. I just put out whatever I think is interesting and polish it up. But it's also because, I mean, we're not an explicitly Catholic outlet. Yes, a lot of our contributors are devout Catholics, but we aim to speak to all human beings who have a desire for truth, who want to engage the culture in a serious way. And when I think about my own experience of evangelization, it wasn't that like people came up to me with an agenda, with a set of tactics to convince me that Christ is the truth. It's that I met friends who took my questions, who took my heart seriously. So that's what we try to do. We just try to take people and the culture around us seriously, and we hope it inspires people to seek truth. But that's not in my hands. I leave it up to them, to their freedom. I leave it up to God. So.
You say something in your Manifesto 2.0, and we want our listeners and viewers to check out your Manifesto 2.0, which is up now, I think, on your Substack, the Cracks in Postmodernity. Really terrific, really entertaining read, and just a short, informative read. But there are a couple of places that I want to highlight, and maybe we can get into them. But the first one relates to some of what you've already said. This is quite provocative, but it really spoke to me. I loved it. You say this: the sad fact is that most people who are interesting today are wrong about a lot of things, whereas most people who are right about a lot of things are really boring sticks in the mud. I just like slapped the table and I said amen loudly when I read that sentence. And I did so because it can be just so frustrating, especially being a person who wants to live in the truth. And for us, that means what has been revealed to the world, that we believe it subsists fully in the Catholic Church. But there's this whole sort of industry which is sort of about this way, not that way, this way, not that way, and this whole sort of this boring trope over and over again that seems just sort of very closed off. In my view, and maybe I'm like you, Stephen, where it's just because of how I grew up, what I've been listening to and watching and reading my whole life, that I just can't turn all that stuff off. I can't. I sometimes maybe wish I could, but I find some of that, which is far from avowedly Christian or Catholic, to be kind of really nourishing to me. So I don't know. That's just my thought. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, part of why I say that it's kind of inspired by this quote from Oscar Wilde's play Lady Windermere's Fan. And so the protagonist, Lady Windermere, says, it is, I'm pulling it up, hold on. She says, it is absurd to divide people into good and bad. People are either charming or tedious.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously we shouldn't take that literally, as most of Wilde's epigrams or aphorisms. You have to take them as like half joking statements. So obviously, okay, there's such a thing as good and bad people, but if we're overly fixated on moralizing everything, just trying to determine whether people are good and bad, we ignore this issue of like, okay, but are we saying things that are interesting, that are really provoking our curiosity, or are we just being boring and humdrum? And I think a lot of it, especially in the US, I think Catholics struggle because the US, it is a puritanical country. It was formed by a certain puritanical branch of Protestantism, with which, if you look at that brand of theology, there's very little space for like us robust metaphysics. Like there's no sense of ontology, there's no sense of aesthetics. That's why, and again, no disrespect to Protestants. We have lots of Protestant friends and readers, but and again, like that branch of Christianity downplays the ontological, the aesthetic. That's why a lot of the churches are very bare bones. And as a result, they overfixate on morality. Whereas in, traditionally Catholic cultures, especially my own background within the Mediterranean, we understand that Christianity starts with this metaphysical proposal. It's not a primarily moral one. It's metaphysical, it's ontological. It's about the nature of reality, about the nature of being human and how Christ responds to this, it fulfills our nature as human beings. And then an aesthetic cultural imagination is born out of that. And then ethics. How do we live, right and wrong? But if we boil Christianity down to right and wrong, first of all, none of us are good on our own. I mean, that's, going back to basics. Like we, without a relationship with Christ, we're all bad. So to turn everything into a matter of moralism, like that's the first way you make everything boring and also just unrealistic, out of touch with reality. So that's why, again, like I'm open to engaging with people who I think are wrong, or even to a certain extent bad. And I'm not afraid to call it out. Like when I'm, citing Camille Paglia, I'll say, yeah, I mean, I fundamentally disagree with her worldview because she considers herself like an atheist pagan. Like she rejects certain fundamental aspects of Christianity. But metaphysically speaking, aesthetically speaking, I think she's spot on. And even when she's wrong, like I think all people, especially Catholics, should engage the questions she's asking, should consider what she's saying. The same case with a lot of postmodern theorists like Baudrillard, who I also cite a lot. Wrong about plenty of things, but the questions he's asking are super interesting. They're thought provoking, but also I think we all people of goodwill need to be asking these questions. That's why I'm like, hey, I'll call a spade a spade. If someone's wrong, I'll say it. But if they're interesting, I'm gonna engage it. So I think especially Catholics, especially in the US, we need to be a little less squeamish. We need to be curious. We need to be open to like, okay, if something's interesting, let's talk about what's good in it, what's also bad in it. It's not this binary, this is bad, this is against the church, this is okay. Because a lot
Yeah.
of things that are okay according to the church, yeah, I mean, are really boring and just not interesting. It's a waste of time. So,
We'll take somebody who's like absolutely not boring. I mean, Friedrich Nietzsche, he's like one of the liveliest writers around. Um, I remember in college I had to read his Birth of Tragedy for this
mhm.
like Greek tragedy. Well, I decided to read that, but it wasn't really related to the class too much itself. But I mean, that's somebody you think of him as kind of coming from a Protestant, German background, but then going down into the culture, like a lot of Germans and Englishmen going to the South, where families from the Mediterranean and encountering this, I don't know how to say it. Yeah, this culture, this thing where, yeah, the moral part isn't necessarily primary, but there's a
Mhm.
lot more to it. In your manifesto too, you have a whole thing about being a court jester. And the other day, I was walking around one of the art galleries here, and they've got in Polish art tradition, they always have the jester is the court
Mhm.
jester is in a lot of these like Jan Mateko's famous work and many others, where the jester sees more than the others. And there's one where, he's kind of always sad in the background. Everybody's laughing and the whole thing's kind of doomed. I was also a week ago, we had Notre Dame McGrath Institute out here in Krakow, and it was the first time I met Arthur Rossman. I know you wrote for or you've written for
Mhm.
Church Life Journal, and I always associate Arthur Rossman with the court jester because I mean the guy you talk about cracks in modernity. I thought maybe he would have come up with that title himself because he used to have what Lost or Cosmos in the Lost.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, and so he for me is something like that court jester, picking up a lot of things in postmodernity. But could you say something a little bit about that? And like you say, we aim to function as a sort of court jester, attempting to bring some levity into a very self-serious culture.
Yeah, I mean, we don't really we don't laugh enough. Like we really do. Again, part of function of this puritanical mindset. Like we're deathly afraid of being on the wrong side of history, and whether we're super devout Catholics, but also people within like the political discourse. Like you see this in quote unquote SJW circles. Like people are super serious about proving that we're not bad or on the right side. And the first problem with this, the first problem for me is that that's really boring. Like I think we need to have fun. Like if we're not having fun, I don't know, like what are we doing here? But on a more like theological, spiritual level, if we take of course, we need to take ourselves seriously to a certain extent. Of course, we need to be serious about the way we live our lives, about ethics. But if we forget we aren't God, we're broken human beings in need of salvation, this requires humility. Like we need to acknowledge that no, we aren't always right. We mess up a lot. We make mistakes and that we're in need of God's mercy. One of the key ways I think I like to remind people of that is through humor, to make fun of how stupid we are as human beings. I'll make fun of how dumb I am. So that's why I try to inject some kind of like ironic humor in there to remind people, okay, like we can't be when we're arguing about serious ideological, intellectual issues, like we need to laugh a little bit because no, we don't have it all figured out. We're all trying to make sense of the world through through our stupidity, through our mistakes. And it's also, I mean, I've quoted elsewhere on the Substack that if you look at the famous Jewish comedians, like they're taking from the Jewish prophetic tradition, which, is based on this understanding that human beings are broken. We're in need of God's mercy. It's like if you don't have a sense of that ironic humor about, it's also, I think of Cornel West, who talks about like the tragicomic dimension of humanity. Like there's something tragic about how broken we are, but it's funny in the end because like we're not doomed by our sinfulness, by our brokenness. There is this promise of salvation. But again, like without that laughter, we forget that no, we're not God. We need someone to save us. So that's my ultimate hope. But again, I do want to make people giggle a little bit. I want people to have a little bit of fun when they're reading about the issues that we post about.
I remember, Stephen, when I was about 13 years old and I started watching Woody Allen movies. And
Mhm.
I was, Protestant kid from the suburbs, and I just felt like this is how I want to be. Like this world is the one that I want to live in. This is funny and serious at the same time. This is like, just such brilliant stuff. And I don't know if this will come across as, I don't know, to cradle Catholics as insulting or something, but my wife and I both, when we became Catholic, we actually had this sense that not only was Catholicism sort of funnier than Protestantism, but it was, from a Protestant perspective, kind of like Jewish adjacent in a
Yes.
strange way, and it was like, I don't know, it felt like we were sort of like reconnecting with something where we could understand life better because we were given permission finally religiously not to take it so seriously.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's definitely that overlap between the Jewish and Catholic sensibility, but what you're saying reminds me of the Simpsons episode where there's Catholic heaven and Protestant heaven. And
Yeah.
the Protestant heaven, I think they're like at a country club playing croquet, and then Catholic heaven, like they're doing Irish step dancing, and the Italians are beating each other up, and they're drinking and having a good time. So yeah, I mean, I can definitely see that difference. Yeah.
Yeah, and one more thought about that. I have come to believe that one of the most boring questions nowadays to ask about a piece of art, for example, is it woke? That said, there are aspects of wokeism that are also very boring to me. And one of the manifestations of that is, I think there's something to this sense that people have that things that used to be funny aren't funny anymore because, a kind of like woke ideology has like kind of eclipsed what, like Saturday Night Live, for example, is one place that people point to, right? And there are other examples as well. And I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but a sense I get from your work, and certainly something that I value, is this sort of, let's not, I don't know, even while we're sort of trying to make sense of what some of these things represent, we can't be like we can't hold anything as too sacrosanct, I guess.
Yeah, no. I mean, and SNL is one of the greatest, worst examples of this because, I mean, you can talk about like the Jewish comedic sensibility. I mean, that's what SNL was up until about 10 years ago, which was amenable to a Catholic sensibility. Like you had Irish, Italian Catholics who were very much present on the cast. But I mean, my whole thing though is like things like SNL humor was not killed per se by wokeness. I think this is where like so the sociologist Christopher Lasch, who we're very into at Cracks and Pomo, kind of diagnoses that a lot of these ideological shifts are really come down to like more psychological changes. And I mean you see, without getting too technical, like you see this shift towards neoliberal economics, there's this psychological shift towards the self, this narcissistic focus on me, my identity, proving that I'm good, proving that I'm on the right side, really kills your imagination. And I think wokeness is a result of this shift towards the individual. And again, it's part and parcel of certain economic changes. So when you have these like super flat scripts and writing and acting in SNL, like, yeah, a lot of it's because, the humor has been killed by political correctness, and wanting to check off certain identity boxes and whatnot. But it's also because I just think the new generation of writers and actors don't know how to look at the universe in this kind of tragicomic sense. Everything's been flattened, not just by political ideology, but because like this is the structure of life now. It's very focused on the individual, not on the larger sense of me being part of the cosmos, being part of society. And I mean, it's sad, but this is why I hope we can revive not just that sense of humor, but the sense, okay, the universe is much bigger than me having to prove I'm on the right side of history and all this kind of simplistic stuff.
I like that, with not having to prove you're on the right side. I mean, I was watching something with Adam Sandler and Chris Farley the other day. I think my YouTube is full of those videos, the two of them. But you think about Chris Farley. I mean, he died in the John Hancock building in Chicago after. I mean, I think I mean, I don't know what happened, but I know he used to sometimes invite prostitutes up to his apartment up there, and he might have died right after. I don't know what happened, but he supposedly used to run off to confession right away. I mean, he still had this sensibility that no matter all of his faults, and he had a lot of them, he was always going to confession. There's a famous priest in Chicago who was his roommate at Marquette, and always said that Farley was kind of like a child. I mean, if he did something and he felt like it was wrong, he tried to make amends, but he was always making mistakes. You think about him interviewing Paul McCartney, idiot. But anyways, I want to talk too about some of your influences. Kind of going along these lines. You mentioned Camille Paglia already. You have Andy Warhol. Charles Taylor, that's obvious with the cracks in postmodernity with the secular age and going beyond the immanent frame. But I wanted to ask you too about who was it here? Okay, the secondary influence. I have to admit, and this may show how uncultured I am, but I never heard of Adam Curtis. But I looked him up, and I was watching what's it called? This documentary called Hypernormalization.
Yeah.
was so much fun. So can you talk about that? Because you also mentioned like taking some of these. What I noticed in his documentaries is that he takes something from like pop culture and
Hmm.
brings it together, juxtaposes that with some very serious stuff, and that
Hmm.
seems to be like kind of your approach.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So could you maybe say something a little bit about him and also like what that approach is?
Yeah, I mean that mixing pop culture with like high intellectual stuff. I mean that's also like that's Polya's thing,
Yeah.
writing this intellectual thesis about Madonna or Mick Jagger. But with Adam Curtis, I mean what's interesting to me about him is the way that he really looks at how discourse is shaped by entities of power. And my kind of like Catholic angle into this is I mean, ultimately, like the teaching of subsidiarity, that the church has this wisdom about the nature of power, that because of original sin, power tends towards corruption. This is why power needs to be limited, first by, the moral law. But I mean, Catholic social teaching, thanks very much to Pope Leo XIII, who articulated it very clearly that, issues should be taken care of at the most basic level possible. So I shouldn't have to call someone at the White House to deal with a traffic light in my neighborhood that's not working. I would call a local representative who's more familiar with the neighborhood and the needs of the people here. Same way with like, okay, let's say your children are fighting. Rather than you coming in and solving it for them, you should encourage your kids to solve the problem themselves. So then you don't become a helicopter parent and then you raise snowflakes who can't function in the real world. So it's this idea that, because God gave us agency as individuals, like we should take responsibility for ourselves. We should solve problems ourselves. But again, it's also this awareness that the further an entity of power is removed from the issue or the people involved, like the more likely that power is going to be corrupted, the more it's not going to help to serve the common good. And I think Adam Curtis has this way of talking about, okay, like how is the way that we talk about current events, especially political issues, but also pop culture, shaped by mass media, for the worse, ultimately? Because again, the people in these like mega media conglomerates, if you look at CNN, Fox, ABC, whatever, like most of them are very much far removed from the lives of everyday people. So the narratives they use to frame whatever's going on in the world usually are in the interest of like bolstering their own power rather than again serving the common good, speaking to what's actually happening on the ground, how it's impacting everyday people. And for me in particular, I guess like Adam Curtis talks about how this kind of Manichaean binary, left versus right, Democrats versus Republicans, or in the case of like when he talks about 9/11, like Americans who are for freedom, and then the fundamentalist Muslims who are for whatever backwards kind of social structures. It's like, okay, is it really this simplistic? Is it really just this side versus that side? And then what's the effect ultimately? The more we divide everyday people from each other, the more we lose our agency to actually take ownership over our lives. And then the more people in power have control to do whatever we want as we're distracted, bickering over these alleged controversies. When I think about I mean, just I think about like when we think about civil rights, like you think about how the kind of racial discourses in the country serve to divide working class blacks and whites. Because I mean, if the working class blacks and whites actually got together, formed coalitions to defend their rights together, to defend each other's rights, think of how powerful that would have been. Think of how that much that would have challenged certain, social elites, people who really have the power to make decisions in this country. Whereas if you just get the working class people divided amongst each other, fighting and over small issues, like so again, I think Curtis does an excellent job of highlighting, okay, a lot of these binaries are constructed to take people's agency away from them. And I think, again, especially Catholics, given the Church's social teaching, should be interested in the kind of work someone like Curtis is doing.
Yeah. Can I just say one thing before I turn it over to Andrew? It's just interesting that like so many of the issues where you do start to have people who, from various backgrounds may find like some common ground. We were immediately distracted by something else that then politically becomes like the main concern. You probably, I don't know, you might want to back off this, but like a lot of this stuff around, like I'm just thinking like where did a lot of this kind of transgender stuff kind of come out of? I don't want to get into that because maybe it
Yeah,
does
but
have
that's
like
a
a
prime
little bit of
example.
but I just wonder like with the stuff after 2008, with the financial crisis, it's amazing how like
Yeah.
with Occupy Wall Street. I know some people kind of laugh at a lot of that stuff, but there was something really, I think, serious being brought to the forefront that was like for my generation. I was still in college then. That was like a real issue. And then all of a sudden, like the main topic of discussion was becoming this other thing. And not discrediting that, but it was just all of a sudden we weren't really necessarily talking about that. And it seems like Adam Curtis and what he's doing is kind of pointing out some of those things.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to say something about the trans stuff though, because I mean, a big focus of cracks in postmodernity is gender and sexuality related
Yeah.
topics. And again, just for the sake of clarity, like I follow the church's doctrines, like I don't deviate at all, but I do have a kind of commonsensical way of dealing with these issues. Again, like a not overly moralistic one, because I understand, like, again, as human beings, we're complicated. We
Yeah.
we all struggle with different kinds of sins. So, like, I'm not scandalized if someone tells me that they're, struggling with gender identity, they want to transition. Like, yeah, I have certain moral convictions, but I'm not gonna freak out and like be like, oh my God, you're on the wrong side now, you're unclean.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that being said, like the fact that, like you said, there are real issues that impact everyday people, especially economic ones.
And
So
including the gender sexuality issues. I
yeah,
want to,
but when you kind of create this boogeyman out of this issue, issues like this, like what percentage of the population genuinely has gender dysphoria? And then from that small group is actually going to cross-identify. It's a very small minority. And I'm all for like, okay, people who struggle with that should not be beaten up and tortured for it. Absolutely not. But when we invent this kind of, again, this boogeyman issue, so then you have the left who's saying, okay, we must defend trans rights and we have to push it in the schools. And then if a kid says they're not sure about their gender identity, we should encourage them to transition. It's like, okay, obviously this is ridiculous. But then the reactionary side on the right, like, oh, the transgender bathrooms, and it's like the action reaction cycle
yeah.
serves to distract from real issues that we could all be united over. People who lean left, people who lean right. When we're all fixated on the trans issue, we're distracted from the fact that, again, there are other issues that we could actually be working together to solve. So it's in the interest of certain entities in power that we be arguing about this rather than something like, okay, economic collapse. Um, so that's why I'm saying, like, again, we can have our moral convictions. I have mine, but I'm not going to elevate that to the point that I'm going to freak out if I meet someone who's trans or someone who's very pro-gender stuff. I'm more interested first, who are you as a person? Because, okay, you're made in the image of God. We're called to communion to be open to all people, but also from a political level, like I'm more interested in what can we work together on, what can we talk about, what can we agree on, even if, yeah, I do have certain reservations about these beliefs. That's why I'm like, we should all be looking to forge common ground rather than polarizing, well, you're on this side, I'm on that side, because we're not going to accomplish anything if we're all divided
Yeah.
amongst ourselves.
Yeah, and I have to say, just from a personal perspective, Stephen, your work is helping me think through some of these things. I feel like in my own life, I've damaged relationships with people over these kinds of questions, and I don't feel good about that. And I want to think of this in a better way. And I think you're helping me and others, I think, in various ways to do so. Yeah, kind of on that point, maybe we could talk about like you mentioned a lot that you like horseshoes. But what do we mean by that? In your in your manifesto, you talk about like ideological horseshoes. What do you mean by horseshoes? Why is that a helpful way to think about some of
Yeah.
these things?
So horseshoes, I mean, it's looking at the ways that seemingly opposed ideologies or cultural phenomena actually overlap in some way. And I should be clear that like there are certain forms of horseshoe theory that I think are a little bit more sinister in a way because like there are forms of horseshoe theory that try to subvert certain ideologies from within in order to advance their agenda. So like you have crypto fascists, you have people who are very far right who try to make their way into left-wing circles and then flip people from within and vice versa. That's not necessarily what I'm doing. What I'm doing is, again, coming from a Christian point of view that we're all made for communion. We should strive towards unity as much as possible. So that's why I might try to emphasize, okay, like, there are certain ways that seemingly opposed groups or ideologies have something in common, and they should be talking about that. So, like, the big one that I often talk about is like the kind of traditionalist, monotheistic perspective and the kind of queer theory one. Because when you look at like queer theory as an intellectual, as a school of thought, but also certain iterations of queer popular culture, you do see a lot of overlap, especially with certain brands of like Catholic sacramental theology, art, liturgy. That's why I'm just like, we're told that there's this clash between the LGBT community and the conservative Catholic community. And my whole thing is like, well, why is there this clash? Like who framed it this way? I think when you really pay attention, there's a lot more in common. And that's why, again, like taking Adam Curtis's cues, we need to deconstruct the narrative and ask, okay, like where did this narrative come from? What's actually going on the ground? Same with certain political ideologies, like especially if you are a Catholic and you take Catholic social teaching seriously, you can see overlap between certain iterations of conservatism and progressivism. You have people like Chesterton and Dorothy Day who are prime examples of this. So I don't know. Again, it's like I think we need to unlearn the framing of a lot of cultural divisive issues and ask, okay, but where is the convergence? Just because we've been taught to see things as completely opposed to each other, it doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily mean it's the case.
Just as an aside, a while back, we had on back-to-back episodes, we had a great thinker who's actually one of your influences here, John Milbank, come on and talk
Yeah.
to us about nationalism, and he was very anti-nationalist, and yet the next week we had this guy on, another friend of ours, Nathan Penkoski, actually, who writes for Compact, and he was articulating a very pro-nationalist viewpoint. For Bobby and me, I'll just speak for myself, but I think this is true for you too, Bobby. I mean, we heard a lot of convergence in the
Yeah.
two in the two different perspectives, and yet they both kind of were positioning themselves publicly as having opposite viewpoints, at least opposite titles
Yeah.
attached,
Yeah.
in a way, like not totally, but like in certain respects.
Yeah, I mean Milbank's contributed a couple pieces to our Substack very, very graciously.
You guys had a good interview with him too, right?
Yeah. I mean, we've done a lot with Milbank, and it's part because like I personally agree with a lot of what he says. Even though Cracks and Pomo is not a political outlet, like I say in the manifesto, like we deal with cultures, with topics of politics tangentially, cultural
Yeah.
politics, political discourse. But when it comes to politics, yeah, like I do agree with Milbank for the most part. But I mean, when you take someone like Nathan, no, I mean, I don't consider myself a nationalist, but I'm interested in Nathan's ideas because I see there's validity, there's truth there. That's why I want to be in dialogue with someone like him, even if, yeah, I'm more aligned with Milbank. But yeah, I mean, if we stopped kind of hiding in these silos, like staying stuck in these boxes, we would see, okay, like there are sufficient opportunities for engagement, for agreement, if we stop framing it in this kind of
Yeah.
way.
It's almost like you just think that you learn these frameworks, based on not only like what the media gives you as a kid, but growing up. I mean, I like you, I mean, I grew up in suburbia.
Yeah.
And you think like, okay, typically you have the TV on all day. all of these things that you're kind of handed this construct. And I mean, I'm from the Southwest side, and we've got all these issues of even how to think about the civil rights movement, which is actually, you don't get into like the real details of what happened on the South Side. But all I want to say is what I think, like when I read Milbank and I read Nathan, and I see in your manifesto this like stress on rootedness, and
Mhm.
even going like into the cities, and anyways, exploring that. And you have a good piece too on your kind of liturgical tourism in the city,
Mhm.
New
Yeah.
York. But I think a lot of people are sick and tired of what the kind of life world is in the suburbs. And there's a lot of Catholics, people who, or maybe not just Catholics, but people like who in some ways have found that crack, and are getting out of whatever the framework is. They want to move to the city. So could you maybe say something about that? Because like um, I I just noticed like yeah, just leaving the suburbs is something I whenever I had a when we were in Dallas, Andrew, and they're saying, "Oh, you got to go like buy a house maybe in the suburbs." That was something that like I just resisted with everything in me. I mean, I was like, absolutely not. And thankfully, my wife, there's not really such a thing as the suburbs in well, they are kind of creating suburbs in Poland now, but I just resisted that. So I don't know. Is that kind of like partially, well, that's you're reacting to that, I think as well.
Yeah, I mean, Cracks and Pomo is very explicitly anti-suburbs. I mean, first of all, as like a form of urban planning, but also as an ideology, as a sociological phenomenon, because uh, I mean, we've written countless stuff against the suburbs, but it's not a natural form of living. Like it's very much the product of like industrial American capitalism, which, the church says is in conflict with its teachings in plenty of ways. But no, it's just society, this has never happened. It's either you live in an urban center or you live in the rural countryside where you're farming. Um, because both of those forms of urban planning are conducive to human flourishing in distinct ways. And also, they live in a symbiotic relationship with each other because the cities need the countries to produce the food, but also, the country needs the cities for industry and for intellectual life and, all the other things that happen in cities. But in suburbs, like you don't do anything in the suburbs. Like you don't, you work, most people don't work in the suburbs. It's extremely hard to socialize because there's so little social friction. Like it's ordered around isolation, which again, we're not designed, humans are not designed for this. We're designed to be in communion, to be constantly interacting with each other and interacting with the land. That's where, the countryside comes in. But my biggest concern is how uh, I see how a lot of people my generation who grew up in the suburbs like struggle spiritually, but also psychologically with identity disorders, with mood disorders, because again, like there's no sense of identity, there's no sense of roots. We don't know who we are. We don't know why we exist. We're told that we're made to live a nice, quiet, cozy life. You go to college, get a degree, get a good job so you can pay for a comfortable house in the suburbs, and then what? And then you're miserable. And then again, like, I'm sorry, but why is it there's so many of people who struggle with gender identity issues coming from the suburbs? The majority of my
Hmm.
friends I graduated high school with are on antidepressants or mood stabilizers. It's, I mean, yes, part of it is because there's more mental health awareness, but the majority of it, the cases, I think, are because people have no sense of meaning or rootedness, of connectedness anymore. And again, this is part of the issue with this narrative that like we were made to live a nice, comfortable life, to be successful. No, that's not what we were made for. Like we were made for communion. We were made to be in relationship with Christ. I think it's easier to see that in the city or in the countryside, but I don't know. I mean, I kind of want to tie this into my beef with nuclear families because the suburbs serve to function the nuclear household. I don't think it's healthy to live within nuclear households. Like I think we were meant to live in intergenerational kind of settings where you have grandparents, you have aunts and uncles and cousins. First of all, economically, it's much more sustainable if you have multiple sources of income. And let's say, someone in the family loses a job, then you're not going to be struggling to eat, to survive, because there are other people who, it's like, I think we're afraid to depend on each other. Like we want to have it all figured out ourselves, because if I have to depend on my brother or my father or whoever, it's embarrassing. But again, it's much more sustainable. And also it's psychologically healthier for kids who grow up around multiple adults and other relatives, that it's not just you and your parents. And then when there's tension, it becomes super heavy and uncomfortable. Whereas if you have other people around, you diffuse the tension. It becomes a little bit easier.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, we're very anti-suburbs for all those reasons above.
I really appreciate that. I am kind of in exile in the suburbs right now. Unlike Bobby, I did buy a home in the Dallas suburbs when we moved here in 2020. Not the worst of all the suburbs in the DFW metroplex, but I like to say it is offset somewhat by the fact that my children are growing up in an intergenerational home, because my wife's mother lives with us, and it's a blessing. It's a huge blessing. And it actually has served, Stephen, in some tough times, actually, to benefit us all, not only kind of in some spiritual way, but in a real tangible way. I mean, we have another person in our house who can buy groceries sometimes, or who can help out and watch the kids. Yeah, totally.
But also that the kids will be able to take care of grandma when she needs it. Like that's good for grandma, but it's also good for the kids to have rather than sitting on their iPads all day, to take care of an elderly person. Like that's really good spiritually and psychologically.
Yeah, absolutely. On that note, I was also thinking about how, it's funny how some of our fellow American Catholics and Protestants too, for that matter, are increasingly suspicious of the cities, and also have a kind of, frankly, I think a kind of incorrect theological viewpoint on the family. You hear a lot, Bobby and I have talked a lot about John Paul II and theology of the body and his view of kind of marriage and family and stuff like that. And we believe, and Bobby, you can kind of speak to this more than me, but I mean, we believe that like there's almost a whole kind of like industry within American Catholicism in particular that likes to cherry pick certain very specific like talks, even lines in talks, right, to kind of beef up a very particular view of the kind of American style nuclear family. And we've tried anyway in some of our conversations to explode that notion a little bit, and to get people thinking a little differently. I don't know, Bobby, if you want to jump in before Steven does.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. Well, I'm just thinking back to the time, like I grew up in the suburbs, the southwest side of Chicago, but nevertheless, my grandma was like 10 minutes walking distance away. My aunt and uncle, they were the same. I mean, everybody was kind of still in the neighborhood. But I look at my, like my cousins, even though we all grew up together. I mean, literally, there wasn't one weekend that I was like at my own house. I was either at grandma's house, I was either up in Oak Park with my cousins or somewhere else. But now, I mean, with the job situation too, and the expectation that you're just going to, move for a career. And I mean, we were all pushed into that because of the education that we got. And also just, I mean, our parents wanted that for us. But a lot of us are just lonely and depressed now, because we have to buy like a really expensive air ticket to go visit a family member or go visit friends. And so we're all kind of like scattered, and it's really hard to make a community that's so intentional, that's not familial. And there's a lot of tension around that too, because you don't have, like you mentioned, Stephen, the ability to kind of easily diffuse a situation. So anyways, yeah, I'm sorry. I was just thinking about that when you were talking about it, Andrew. So
Yeah, and also for married couples, because like having those other people in the house to diffuse tension, like I think that can help a lot when I don't know. Like I think it's divorce becomes less of a question, an option when you have other people in the house who can like when you're really pissed off at each other. Okay, like I can just go chill with whoever else is in the house. Like it's not just you and me and against each other. Like all right, I'm pissed off, but it will blow over. But yeah, I mean, I also just want to add that Cracks and Pomo's agenda is very hyperbolic. Like we're trying to swing the pendulum very far the other way, knowing that a lot of the stuff we say are not real. It's not realistic. Like I know that most people cannot, it's not a feasible option to live in an intergenerational household, to stay in the same city as your family members. The job market's hard. That's the reality. I just don't want it to become normative. That like we just uproot, leave our families in order to pursue our careers and act like nothing's wrong. So again, it's not that I'm morally condemning. Like I don't do all the things that I advocate for. Like I still buy on Amazon Prime sometimes, even though I think it's evil. But let's just not back to the Adam Curtis bit. It's like let's call into question the things we take for granted to be normal. Like it isn't normal to just up and leave your family and where you're from like it's nothing. If you have to do it, then you do it, but you do it with a certain awareness that like, okay, there is a sacrifice, there's a pain here that I should mourn, I should lament. If I do move, like, is there a way maybe I can bring my parents with me so that they can be around my kids? Like, I just want to question the discourse. I'm not saying like we must, rebel against the status quo. Like, I don't have it in me to do that. So,
Yeah, and I mean, sadly, we're at the place where some of us are. It isn't a question of just this generation leaving home. I mean, we're already homeless in a sense. Like, I mean, we already aren't from anywhere, and now we're going to go live somewhere else. On top of that, it's like it's almost multiplied now. Multiple times over. But I will say this, Stephen. I think that on the question of sort of what's realistic, frankly, I think moving to a city and trying to build community there is a whole lot more realistic than the utopian goals of like moving out to the country and trying to homestead or something, which, I mean, hey, God bless people who are able to do that. I'm not. To me, it's completely unrealistic. It's absurd. Whereas moving to a city, it's not. I'm not afraid of that. I think that would be great.
Maybe can you say something to, sorry, but you mentioned like third places. And maybe can you tie that into this a little bit?
Yeah, so I mean, third places, that's Ray Oldenburg, I think, and Lash cites this concept a lot. But I mean, spaces outside of the home and the workplace where people can congregate informally, spontaneous interactions, which obviously there are a lot more third places in cities. It's not impossible in the suburbs. Like there are some suburbs that do have an active downtown. The question of whether you can walk there is, that's another question. But I think even if you live in the suburbs, like you can work to foster these third spaces where, people can run into each other regularly, get to know each other, have informal conversations. But I mean, on the flip side, though, there are a lot of people in the city, especially in New York, who are lonely. Um, there are plenty of opportunities to get to know people, but some people just don't avail themselves of those opportunities. So it's not, I don't want to make it sound like automatically everything will be magically better if you live in the city. You still have to work on it but I think, like no matter where we live, we should be interested in fostering and inhabiting third spaces because if it's just I go to work and I go home, or if I work from home, even worse, like where are the chances to meet random strangers, meet my neighbors, and just talk about whatever it may be, whether it's current events, whether it's the weather, I don't know. But we have to be talking to people in public.
But Matthew Crawford even talks about something like there's an erotic dimension to the city. Like, I mean, I got to be careful here in Poland, and I don't like my wife's the most beautiful woman in the world for me. But there's something about when you're walking around the city and people have dressed up, and they've dressed up to be noticed. And there's something that's really when I don't go into the city, like, and I'm at home all day, I feel like not only do I have cabin fever, but I'm like something's missing, and I feel rejuvenated when I just I get to walk around and there's people, just not trying to survive walking on a little sidewalk by the big street dominated by cars, but I see people. There's just something like really enjoyable about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, and not just erotic in the sexual sense, but like in the sense of beauty, the sense of aspiring towards something greater. Yeah, I mean, I think the way we present ourselves in public, not that we want to be overly vain, but yeah, like we should have a sense that we want to, in Italian, as we say, fare bella figura. We want to look nice, want to look presentable, and like we value ourselves, And I think, yeah, you definitely see that a lot more in cities. Yeah, I don't know. But everything should be beautiful though, like not just in an aesthetic sense, but in like a human, deeper sense. Like we should aspire to that every part of our lives should be beautiful, even within our homes, the way we clean our house and the way we decorate it and the order that we have and the way we live our household, like should be part of everyday life.
I'm afraid we've just about run out of time. Bobby, any final words to Stephen before we sign off with him?
No, this was great, Stephen. I love how you kind of connect everything. So it's a joy to talk to you.
It's a little all over the place, but I hope it all kind of converges in some way. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we like to do. Just have a kind of breezy conversation with our friends. We love your work, Stephen, and we're definitely gonna keep in touch. I really do regret that having just been in New York City, I didn't see you in the flesh, but I'll have to get back very soon and do so. Maybe we can get Bobby back across the Atlantic for a little New York trip too. That'd be great.
I'd love to come. I'm getting nostalgic for America. So
yeah. Well, on that note, so Stephen, where can everyone find your work?
Yeah, so our main place is Cracks in Postmodernity on Substack. We also have a podcast. We're on Instagram. We have a print zine. But yeah, if you just go to the Substack, you'll find the links to everything there.
Great, thanks. And also, Stephen's a great follow on X, Twitter, whatever you call it, if you're on that platform. So please do go find him over there. On that note, to all of our listeners and viewers, we thank you so much for supporting what we're doing. We really enjoy the conversations that we have. We believe we're curating quite a library at this point of discussions with some of the most interesting people that we know. So thanks for paying attention to what we're doing. And so until next time, God bless you all and live in hope.